Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1233, 1233, Friday, August the 28th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, let's take a look at the last 24 hours of news regarding Spygate, the coup against the president, which continues to this day unabated. Let's focus on let's start right here. Paul Sperry, in a series of tweets yesterday, some very interesting tweets. So let's go through a couple of these. Start with the first one. Paul Sperry tweeted out yesterday, says that the Steele briefing, the briefing that Christopher Steele gave FBI agent Mike Gaeta in Rome in October of 2016, that was the second of two meetings that was held there. The first one was just Steele and Gaeta. That was, I believe, back in July of 2016. Then there was a second meeting, and in that second meeting, it was not just Gaeta there, but they actually had a bunch of FBI brass, whose names we don't know, but we suspect McCabe might have been there. But FBI brass, a handful of them, by the way, not just one or two, but a handful. If I remember correctly, I originally reported on TowerGate, this has been well over a year ago, it was 5, I think, but don't hold me to that, but it was a handful of FBI brass that came over to Rome, Italy for the second briefing with Christopher Steele. And in that briefing, Christopher Steele reveals his fake information from what we can now call the first two memos from the Steele dossier. He had completed his second memo at that point, and that was the information that was presented in that meeting. It was in that same meeting that we learned that while doing that briefing, the FBI brass then informed Christopher Steele, who's working for them as a paid informant. And they tell Steele about their investigations that are ongoing into Carter Page, Michael Flynn, Papadopoulos, and Paul Manafort. Now, that's a problem. FBI agents are not supposed to disclose information about ongoing investigations unless a person has a need to know. And it would generally be someone in the FBI or Department of Justice or something like that. It would not be a paid informant, especially one with as questionable character and integrity as Christopher Steele. So we learned about this well over a year ago. It's in my timeline. I've talked about it 2 or 3 times. But now it appears from what Paul Sperry is saying is, and this is something we suspected, but now I assume he's confirming it, is that Christopher Steele, after getting this information from the FBI, that Manafort, Papadopoulos, Flynn, and Page were under investigation by the FBI, Steele gave that information to Glenn Simpson, which is exactly why you don't give someone information unless they have a need to know. But they give Steele this information. I mean, they were there to get a briefing from Steele about his so-called dossier information. What would later be known as the dossier. At that time, they were simply memos. They were there to get first-hand briefing from Christopher Steele about the information, the fake information he had collected. And in that meeting, they tell him, yeah, we're investigating this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. You know any of these guys or whatever? Well, now we know that Steele, in fact, did tell Glenn Simpson, and Glenn Simpson leaked that to the media. Specifically, what media outlets, Paul Sperry does not say. But he's now confirming what we assumed was true a long time ago. We knew about the briefing. We knew that during that briefing that the FBI broke protocol, and maybe the law, I don't know if there's a law against it, certainly FBI protocol, not to discuss ongoing investigations with people other than those who need to know, which would typically be people in the Department of Justice or other FBI officials or someone else who has a real need to know. Christopher Steele had no need to know any of that. And he gave that information now, according to Paul Sperry, to Glenn Simpson. We suspected this a long time ago. And then, of course, Simpson leaked it to the media, of course. Well, where are the crimes here? I don't know about crimes, but certainly it's a crime in that it feeds into the larger conspiracy that this was all part. Again, like a lot of things that were done, they aren't necessarily crimes. And I'm not saying this is not. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an FBI lawyer. Maybe it is a crime for FBI agents, especially the top brass, to reveal information about an ongoing investigation to a source who did not have need to know. Maybe that's a crime. I don't know. I'm thinking it's probably not a crime. It's probably just a violation of FBI policy. But like a lot of things that were done in the coup effort, they may not on their own, individual acts, be specifically violations of some criminal code. But taken into the larger context of a lot of other things that they were doing that were maybe not necessarily violations of law, but the reason that they were doing these things feeds into the larger conspiracy. And that is a crime. So this, again, is one of them tricky areas. Crime, not a crime. Well, maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. As I said, I'm not a DOJ lawyer or an FBI lawyer. I don't know. I know it's against their policy. I know they're not supposed to be giving information about ongoing investigation to someone unless they have a need to know. And they did that in this case. Whether or not that's a crime, I don't know. But it was part of a larger plot. Part of a larger plot, conspiracy plot, to damage Trump. The point being, give the information to Steele, knowing good and well he's going to do one of two things. It's going to give him fuel so that he can dig up some more dirt on these individuals and put that into his dossier memos. So they're essentially feeding him, saying, yeah, here's some other people you might want to get some dirt on. Or they did it knowing that Steele was the paid mouthpiece for the Clinton campaign and the FBI, knowing good and well that he would tell the Clinton campaign, that he would tell the guy he's working for, Glenn Simpson. And of course they knew that Simpson would leak it to the press. That's what he does. That's his job. So they fed Steele. And they could have had various motives for doing it. But the larger motive is part of the overall conspiratorial plot to damage Trump. Sounds like election interference to me. I think the FBI was involved in interfering in the 2016 elections. What do you think? That's bad, but it gets worse. We also know that Mike Gaeta testified that he did email the New York field office the first two dossier reports on July the 28th of 2016. And then the very next day, July 29th, 2016, is when the FBI headquarters opened their Crossfire Hurricane investigation onto the Trump campaign, which proves what many of us have been saying for a very long time, that the whole Papadopoulos story about that being the reason that they launched the investigation was a lie. It was a lie. And let's remember what we talked about just a week or so ago. Remember, Gaeta was very close friends, long-time close friends, and once worked with who? Over at the New York FBI field office? Stephen Soma. The guy who Horowitz said made the most errors in the FISA application. And of course we talked about how Mike Gaeta was the handler for Chrissy Steele, and Soma is the handler for Halper, the fat man. So Gaeta and Soma, once again, involved. So you can see what happens here. Gaeta, talking to Steele, gets the first 2 memos. He now testifies that he sent those to FBI New York to his good friend Stephen Soma on July the 28th of 2016, and the very next day we get the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, proving that what we've known all along is that it was the Steele garbage that was behind all of it, including the Crossfire Hurricane, and not Papadopoulos at all. They had to run the Papadopoulos game as cover because they knew that the Steele dossier was bullshit, so they had to manufacture the Papadopoulos routine. That's what happened. If you look at the FISA application for Carter Page and look at the date on the FISA application for the first FISA on Carter Page, the date is July 29th. The exact same day that Gaeta sends his buddy Soma, who's on the Crossfire Hurricane team, the first 2 reports from the Steele dossier. Gaeta sends Soma the first 2 memos from the Steele dossier on July 29th. Same day that you see, same date you see on the original FISA application for Carter Page. My. Let's try another one from Paul Sperry. He asked the question, did the FBI rely on the Shearer dossier, he's talking about the Cody Shearer dossier, for the Crossfire Hurricane investigation? Was that one of the things that they used? The Shearer dossier? Well, certainly it was. I mean, to answer Paul Sperry's question, because Jonathan Weiner gave the copy of Cody Shearer's dossier, which was a lot like Steele's dossier because it came from the same sources. And Weiner gives the Shearer dossier to Steele. Steele then puts that information in his memo and ships that off to the FBI. Now, who does Cody Shearer work for? Hillary Clinton. He's one of he and Blumenthal, Shearer and Blumenthal, are Hillary's 2 henchmen, connected to her at the hip. Been with her for her entire career since she was First Lady. Always right there. In fact, even going back to Arkansas. Always right there to do her dirty political hits. And of course, we know that Cody Shearer is the brother-in-law of Strobe Talbot, who we now know was head of the Brookings Institution during 2016. And of course, he's a very close friend of the Clintons. Very close friend. One of their very closest insider friends. So to answer Paul Sperry's question, did the FBI rely on the Shearer dossier for the Crossfire Hurricane investigation? Yes. They did. It was one of the pieces of information that was given to them by Christopher Steele. Shearer's dossier information, false as it was, made its way to the FBI from Steele, who got it from Jonathan Weiner, and it, of course, passed through the hands of Sidney Blumenthal, Shearer's buddy, one of Hillary's 2 henchmen. I think the answer to that question is yes, Paul. We also have another thing from here from Paul Sperry on a slightly different topic. He is saying that Adam the Bug-Eyed Fool Schiff has classified secret the transcript of the testimony of ICIG Michael Atkinson, who's of course been fired. And of course we know that Ratcliffe, who was at that time, before he was ODNI, was on the Intelligence Committee, and he was able to look at well, he was actually in the hearings Excuse me. He was actually in the hearings. He says that on pages 57 and 58 of the transcript, the truth is revealed about what really happened with the Whistler, Eric, Sharamella, Atkinson, and Schiff's office. Schiff is, of course, refusing to release it. He has classified it as secret. And so, and Schiff is also now saying that that's his property. Well, I don't think so. There was a formal hearing, a formal government hearing. That information belongs to the people. As far as the classification, yeah, a committee chairman can classify a document. But the head of the ODNI, who is now Ratcliffe, could probably, who I would assume has a copy of this, could probably declassify it himself or change or override the classification that Schiff has put on it and could release it. And that is what Paul Sperry is calling on John Ratcliffe to do. He's calling on Ratcliffe to change the classification of that transcript, specifically pages 57 and 58, which will, I think, reveal the coup plot, which took place during this is the Ukraine coup plot, which followed the Mueller coup plot, which followed the previous coup plot, which of course involved Michael Atkinson, the ICIG, the Whistler, Sharamella, Adam the Bug-Eyed Fool Schiff, and a bunch of other players. So yes, Paul Sperry wants Ratcliffe to override Schiff's classification of that document and to release it. Yes, he should. If he can, he certainly should. Excuse me. They've released almost every other transcript, a lot of redactions, but they have released a lot of the transcripts. That's the last one that they would not release any part of because of Adam the Bug-Eyed Fool. Yes, if Ratcliffe can override that classification and release it, he absolutely should. Well, Uncle Bob the Executioner, of course, as we know, is part of the coup. A key part of the coup. But he also should be indicted for lying to Congress. One of the charges against Roger Stone was that he lied to Congress. So Roger Stone himself is asking the question, what about Uncle Bob? Not what about Bob? That was a funny movie, but we're talking about Uncle Bob, the Executioner Mueller. What about Uncle Bob, the Executioner Mueller? Because he testified under oath that he was not interviewing for the FBI director job on May 16, 2017, when he and Rodenstein went to talk to the president. As we know, Trump has come out publicly and on Twitter and everything else and stated that yes, it was his understanding that Mueller was there to interview for the FBI director job. Mueller said in the hearings he was not there to interview for the job, but that he was only there to explain to Trump what sort of qualifications or what sort of things that you would need to know about someone to give them that kind of an appointment. Well, I don't think Trump needed to know from Uncle Bob the Executioner and Rodenstein what kind of qualifications, whatever you would need to be FBI director. He has personnel people that can give him that information if he wants it, and I don't think he needed it. No, clearly Uncle Bob the Executioner was absolutely there because Rodenstein and the club wanted to get Uncle Bob in there to replace Comey so he could continue on with the plan. But when Trump decided he did not want Uncle Bob, the executioner, to be his FBI director, then the very next day, May 17, 2017, the day after Trump rejects Mueller, Rodenstein names Uncle Bob the special counsel to investigate Trump. And how do we know that's true? Because of an email sent by Rodenstein. Yes, that's right. On May 17th, Rodenstein wrote an email to Jody Hunt at the OAG saying that Mueller was withdrawing his name from consideration for the FBI director job. Rodenstein telling Jody Hunt in an email the day after Trump decides not to appoint Mueller as his FBI director. Rodenstein writes an email saying, yeah, well, Mueller is withdrawing his name from consideration for FBI director. Because it wouldn't look very good to have Mueller interviewing for the job to be Trump's FBI director, and then Trump deciding he didn't want him as FBI director, and then the very next day, Rodenstein appointing Mueller to investigate Trump. That wouldn't look very good. So that's why Rodenstein had to tell Jody Hunt that Mueller was withdrawing his name from consideration. Well, in order for him to withdraw his name from consideration, his name would have had to have been up for consideration in the first place. But Uncle Bob testified under oath that he was not there to interview for the director's job. Sounds like Uncle Bob the executioner was lying. Oh, and he lied about a lot of things, didn't he? His entire report's a big fat lie. I doubt seriously that they're going to SWAT raid Uncle Bob the executioner, take his hard drive, his computers, his devices, his papers, and all the rest, and haul his ass into jail and charge him with lying to Congress. They should, but A.G. Barr doesn't believe in that. That's not equal justice under the law. Equal justice under the law is when you drag Manafort out of bed, Roger Stone, you drag Bannon off of a yacht. But no, and Barr's Department of Justice, that's only for when you're going after Republicans. We have strict rule of law under Republicans. We do it by the book, So if a Democrat is running the show, oh yeah, you can SWAT raid anybody. You can do whatever you want to the opposition. But in A.G. Barr's world, he doesn't play those games. He does it by the book, which means that you basically let the perps like Mueller off the hook. Because he's had a long storied career with the FBI. We don't want to go after Uncle Bob, do we? Even though I believe Roger Stone is just as old as Uncle Bob. Equal justice under the law? Is that what this looks like to you, Mr. Barr? If it is, if you actually do believe in equal justice under the law, and you said that Roger Stone should have been indicted for lying to Congress, but you thought the penalty was too serious, then Uncle Bob should be indicted and given a sentence which you believe is worthy of that offense. That's Attorney General Barr's reasoning. How many of you think that Attorney General Barr is going to approve arresting or charging Uncle Bob with lying to Congress? He's caught red-handed. It's on video. We have the video of Uncle Bob testifying that he was not interviewing for the job, and we now have Rodenstein's email telling Jody Hunt at the OAG that Mueller's withdrawing his name from consideration. It's what you call smoking gun evidence. But that'll drift off into the ether like everything else. In this quasi sort of parallel universe that we live in, where equal justice under the law seems to change depending on the circumstances and your political affiliation. Catherine Herridge tweeted out yesterday that she's learned that the Senate Judiciary Committee investigators have just interviewed Joe Pientka. They found him. They must have found him. They shipped him out to San Fran as soon as that became public knowledge. They shipped him off somewhere else. But it looks like they've located him because Catherine Herridge is reporting 100% confirmed that the Senate Judiciary Investigative Team has interviewed Pientka behind closed doors for multiple hours. Well, he's a key figure in the Michael Flynn case, and we know that because of Jeff Jensen releasing those documents, giving them to Sidney Powell, and we now know that he was there with Peter Benstrokinis. He was there to do the setup hit on Flynn. He was also involved in attempted setup on the president himself. He was involved in that interview as well. Now, what can we learn from this? Well, if Pientka has now been located and brought to testify in front of the Senate, behind closed doors to the Senate Judiciary Committee's investigators, I think we have to assume at this point that he would not have been released or been able to do so, given permission by the Department of Justice to give that deposition behind closed doors, unless Durham or his investigators were done with him. Durham and his investigators are not going to let Pientka testify to the Senate Judiciary Committee before they get him, because they don't know what he might tell them. So, and the Department of Justice would probably not do that. So I think that tells us that Pientka, according to Catherine Herridge, having now just learned that he's been deposed behind closed doors by the Senate Judiciary Committee, that tells us that certainly he's been deposed by or questioned by Uncle Bob by John Durham or his investigators. And he is a key figure. He's kind of like Peter Benstrokinis' right-hand man. As close as you can get in the investigation. And if he flipped, we don't know if he flipped or not, but the fact that he's testifying to the Senate Judiciary Committee means that he obviously doesn't feel that he's facing any legal repercussions, which means he must have cut a deal, because it's hard for me to imagine that with all that he was involved in, criminal things that he was involved in, that he would be so free as a bird to testify, especially after they've been hiding him for so long. I think he would not agree to testify unless he had some reassurance that what he was going to say was not going to incriminate him, because clearly, if he tells the truth, he's incriminating himself. I mean, he was involved in serious setups, including the Michael Flynn setup. We now know that because of the documents released by Jeff Jensen. Pientka went in there and testified knowing good and well he was going to be asked about that, knowing good and well that what he did was illegal. He wouldn't have done that unless he had some assurances that he was not going to be held in any criminal liability, which means that Pientka has obviously been given an off-the-hook deal. He had to give up someone pretty big, and I would think that the two people he's closest to would have been, certainly Strzok was his right-hand man, his boss, immediately above him, and he worked closely with him, and they were involved in both of those setups. He would have had to have rolled over on Peter Benstrokinis and possibly Anna McCabe, and maybe even given up information on a bigger fish. So I think that's what we can take from that. It certainly better be what we can take from that, because if the other thing is true, if he's free as a bird to speak because he's not under any pressure, criminal pressure, he hasn't been questioned by Durham, Durham's not interested. They have no interest in Pientka. He's not part of their investigation, or they're not looking into any of the things he did, or I mean, if it's that, then we've got a lot bigger problems. Let's just not even go there. Let's not go there. I don't think I would be able to handle it. If I found that out right now, I'd probably pick up this video right here and slam it off that wall. So, or I'd start dropping lots of F-bombs. So, the Senate Judiciary Committee has now interviewed Pientka, a guy who they've been hiding for a very long time. Lindsey Graham has said he also wants to interview Stephen Soma, and he's said his name. I mean, we know who he is. He told Maria Bartiromo he wants to interview Soma. Said he is going to interview Soma. Let's correct that. Lindsey Graham told Maria Bartiromo he is going to interview Stephen Soma. He was the other agent whose name was kept disguised by the IG report, who we figured out who it was. So, of the 4 people who were off limits, people we weren't allowed to talk about or know about or hear from or find out much about, there was Mifsud, Halper, Pientka, and Soma. So now Pientka has been interviewed by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and we can assume, therefore, that he has been cleared by the DOJ to do so, which means means that Durham has already interviewed him and is done with him. Soma, according to Lindsey Graham, he is going to be interviewing Soma, which means the same is true. If we can assume that once Soma speaks to the Senate Judiciary Committee, he too would have almost certainly had to have been interviewed by Durham and been given the clearance to do so, because again, they're not going to allow Soma to talk to the Senate Judiciary Committee until Durham has gotten first crack at him. We know that Durham personally interviewed Downer, when he was over in England. We don't know if he's interviewed Halper. I would have to assume he has, but we don't know that. But that gives us Pientka and Soma. Once Soma's interview comes up, and Lindsey Graham made it sound like that was going to be happening very soon, because he said we are going to interview Stephen Soma. Pientka we didn't know about. We knew they wanted to interview him, but nobody could find him. But it looks like they've gotten Pientka, which means that they'll certainly get Soma. Probably, if they haven't already. And that will only leave 2 people, Mifsud and Halper. And we have to assume that they've interviewed Halper. I can't imagine they wouldn't have interviewed Halper. He's not like on the run or hiding out like Mifsud. He's at his farm in Virginia. Certainly, I would think, key player, they would have had to have interviewed Halper. I can't imagine that they would not have interviewed Halper. I'm talking about Durham. As far as Lindsey Graham's committee, I assume they'll want to eventually get to Halper as well. And that would only leave Mifsud. And of course, if you watched yesterday's video, you know what I said about Mifsud. Mifsud is the key to the whole thing. The whole thing unravels and comes crumbling down when you get Mifsud. And that's why they've been hiding him out so well. I explained yesterday how it's not going to be, wouldn't be too hard to find Mifsud. You think if the FBI wanted to find Mifsud, they couldn't find him? I guarantee they could find Mifsud if they wanted to. And unless he's dead, and I don't think he is. I mean, you can just simply pull up a list of countries, and you can probably eliminate like 97% of the countries where he's definitely not. Won't be too hard to figure out. He's probably either in Italy, London, or maybe one of those other smaller countries in the Mediterranean. And the thing is, if you identify who put Mifsud into the game, you're almost certainly going to find out, and I think you would find out, that Mifsud is tied to either the FBI or the CIA, either directly or through Dearlove and that group over in Cambridge. If you can tie Mifsud directly or indirectly to the FBI or the CIA, boom, there you have it. The thing that set up the frame up that led to the coup, Mifsud, and the end, Misfit working for the FBI or CIA, directly or indirectly. That's it. You know, everything, all you have to do is fill out the space in the middle, the missing pieces in the middle. Get Misfit, find out who put him into the game. Case solved.